Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode from Your Own Pathway Leadership and Mental Well-Being. For those who don't know me, my name is Paya Wu. I'm a trauma informed leadership consultant and a systems psychoanalyst. And my work focuses on this one question. I don't start with what's wrong with people. I start with what the system may be producing people and why. So let's get right into this week's episode. Excuse me, I had to clear my throat here. So last week, my episode in Leadership and Mental Well-Being talked about why systems protected bad leaders. And if you had a chance to watch that episode, today's conversation is really the next question. Because if a system protects itself from examination, accountability, that accountability has to go somewhere. And more often than people realize, it moves downward. Because one of the most common patterns across systems is that accountability often gets examined at the micro first. So, what does this actually mean? So, if you've again followed me, you've heard me talk about systems, you've heard me talk about macro, meso, and micro. So, what this means is that people who are often most impacted by the outcomes of the system, they are often people with the least structural power to change the conditions that are producing the system or producing them. So these are the people who show up every day. These are the frontline workers. These are the people who hear and see everything. And these are often the people who are closest to the frustration, the people who are often closest to the instability. And often the people with the clearest view of what is actually happening. And yet, they are frequently the people with the least authority to influence the conditions that are actually creating those realities. And that's where accountability conversations start becoming distorted. Why? Because responsibility exists at every level. At the micro, yes, even though you're frontline workers, even though it may feel like you have the least structural power, there is a responsibility at the micro level. There is at the level. Often the supervisors, the team leaders, the ones who are absorbing the macro and the micro, and especially the macro. So when responsibility and structural power become disconnected, accountability often begins moving downward. The people with the least authority to change the conditions creating the problem. Why? Well, because examining individuals is often way easier than examining systems. Examining behavior is often easier than examining leadership. Examining performance is often way easier than examining culture. And examining the people experiencing the consequences is often easier than examining the conditions producing them. So, for a while, yes, it appears to work. Yes, people adapt. Yes, teams adjust. And yes, operations continue. And that's where organizations make one of their biggest mistakes. They mistake stabilization for resolution. Just because something appears stable does not mean it actually has been addressed. Sometimes it simply means somebody is compensating. And once compensation becomes normalized, systems begin confusing adaptation with health. The system keeps functioning because somebody is compensating for it. But the thing is, compensation is not the same as resolution. The issue was never actually resolved. You know what happens? It only redistributed. And once something is redistributed, a different question emerges. So where does it go? Because pressure rarely does not disappear, and it moves, and it rarely moves upward. It moves downward. I see that I have the thumb there, but so through the layers responsible for stabilizing the system. So, which brings me to I know this episode is to focus on the micro, but I want to step back and talk a little bit about the meso and how this aligns with the micro. So, with the meso layer, because before accountability reaches the micro, there is often another layer absorbing pressure in between. And these are often the managers, the supervisors, and the team leads, the people who are responsible for translating decisions into the day to day reality. So I want to be careful here. And I want to say not every mesolayer responds the same way. Some do reinforce the pressure, and some do transmit pressure, and some challenge the pressure, and some work very hard to contain the organizational instability before it reaches the people below them, which is the micro. You all heard me talk a lot about my EAP experience because in doing my EAP work, I worked with people from all different levels and saw firsthand and worked with the people in the various levels. And in my EAP work, I've worked with managers who sat in executive meetings, who understood the instability which was happening above them, and made a conscious decision. You know what? All this stuff is going above, and I don't want my people to carry all of this. My people, meaning the people under me, so which is the micro level, to carry all of this. So instead, a lot of these people from the meso, the team leads, the supervisors, they chose to absorb the burdens. And they chose to do this through filtering it, they chose to contain it, not because the issue had been resolved, but because somebody, usually them in the meso level, was trying to prevent unresolved issues from becoming an additional burden for the people below. The important point is not whether meso layers are good or bad. The important part is that they often became the layer through which pressure moves. And we see this pattern outside organizations too. A lot of my work in creating all of this framework and the work that I do, parallel that to families and especially family systems. And even if I talk about all these micro, meso, macro levels, it may sound confusing, which is fine, perfectly fine. But I think something that is closely parallel to this that most people understand is family systems. And so think about this. Think about the family systems and organizational systems, and think about the oldest child growing up in a very unstable household. The oldest child, usually, in an unstable household, maybe the parents are overwhelmed. There is stress, there is conflict, there is instability. And over time, that child, usually the oldest child, learns how to stabilize the environment. They manage the emotions of the parents and all the siblings. They take care of the siblings, and they learn to anticipate the problems before they even happen. And eventually, the family appears functional because somebody is compensating. Now, yes, that child still has choices, just like an employee or employees have choices, just like managers have choices. And yes, from the outside, everything seems functional. But the larger question is, why are they carrying so much responsibility in the first place? Because capability is not the same as responsibility. Just because someone is capable of carrying something does not automatically mean that they should be carrying it. Organizations work the same way. Yes, a team member can appear functional because employees compensate. And yes, a department can appear functional because managers compensate. Yes, a system can appear functional because people continue absorbing pressures they did not create. So, I recently did one of my first presentations on my human systems integrity model. And one of the questions that was actually asked to me was during the leadership presentation was, so if I'm working in a difficult environment, don't I still have the responsibility for how I show up? And my answer was yes. Yes, absolutely. You still choose how you communicate, you still choose how you respond, you still choose what boundaries you set, you still choose how you show up. That absolutely matters. But the thing is, I also added, but the system also has a responsibility because individual accountability should not require chronic overcompensation for unresolved system issues. The question is whether there are responsibilities that should be examined elsewhere in the system first. Because accountability exists at every level. Yes, every level. For example, micro examines behavior, meso examines implementation, macro examines structure. Some problems are implementation problems. Some problems are structural problems. And the intention is not to remove accountability from the micro. The intention is to stop automatically placing accountability there first. Because accountability exists at every level, but responsibility should be examined in proportion to influence, authority, and structural power. So, this is one of the reasons why human systems integrity exists. Because human systems integrity, or HSI, asks a different question, not who is the problem, but what is each layer contributing to the outcome? What behaviors are present? What implementation realities exist? What structural conditions are shaping those realities? Because sustainable change rarely comes from examining only one layer. So, where does it come from? It comes from examining all of them. It comes from examining the micro, the meso, and the macro. The question becomes, what is the system continuing to redistribute instead of structurally addressing? Because pressure does not disappear. Nope, it doesn't. No, it does. It moves. And when accountability is repeatedly pushed downward before the structure is examined, people often find themselves compensating for conditions that they do not have the authority to change. Questions that we have to consider, especially in looking at systems, work, and causation, is this: have we spent so much time examining the people at the bottom that we've neglected to examine the conditions being created at the top? Hard answer, I know. Or have we placed so much responsibility on adaptation that we've avoided accountability for creation? Yes, another hard one to ask. Have we expected people to compensate for realities that should have been examined elsewhere in the system first? Yes. Because what systems normalize, people absorb. And someone always absorbs the cost. As I close down this episode, there's a question. And the question is whether we are willing to recognize where accountability has been placed, where responsibility has been redistributed, and whether there are conditions that have been examined elsewhere in the system first. The question is whether we are willing to recognize it, take accountability, and especially take ownership. So that is all I have for this week's leadership and mental well-being episode, and I hope this episode was helpful for anybody who is wondering where all this accountability goes and why this often happens, especially in systematic organizations. So again, I hope you all stay safe. I hope you all stay well. I hope you all take care of yourself. This is your own pathway, leadership and mental well-being. Again, because systems always produce what they are structured to protect. And you know what? It's time to own it. Bye. Take care. See y'all later.